David, everybody talks about neoliberalism. Can you talk about what that actually means? What does it mean to be neoliberal, and is it a smear? Okay, the second part is easier to answer. People who are against neoliberalism tend to use it as a smear. People who are neoliberal tend not to use the term at all. It's sort of like when the right talks about social Darwinism is a terrible thing. Nobody on the left uses the term. It's a term that mostly exists to smear people you disagree with. Neoliberal is a thing. It's much more a real practical definable thing in modern politics, but it's mostly people criticizing neoliberalism that use the term. So let's first try to figure out what it originally meant, and then we can think about how it's applied now. Neoliberal sort of means small l liberalism with a tendency to support free market capitalism. So I don't mean capital L liberalism, like the Liberal Party in the UK or liberalism as progressivism, but I mean liberalism as the sort of 19th century laissez-faire liberalism, combined or modernized with some particular perspectives that include deregulation of businesses. The Reagan tax cuts were sort of part of more modern 20th century neoliberalism. More defense spending often is in line with modern neoliberalism. What else? Deregulation of the financial industry, deregulation of trucking and banking and airlines. So if we imagine liberalism as sort of a late 19th century movement, neoliberalism is the way in which it was restructured and updated starting sort of in the early 1970s. Economically, it's typically just interwoven with supply side economics, the sort of trickle down tax cuts for the rich are good for everybody type of stuff. It's not just Republicans that are neoliberal or do neoliberal politics. Bill Clinton passing NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, that was a widely accepted neoliberal thing to do. But the sort of underlying ideas are privatization of things that should be or were public, deregulation, cutting government spending under the pretense of the debt, as we've talked about that political football, and turning over more and more of the economy to private companies. And that's where it kind of gets into foreign policy, because right now in the United States, when critics of neoliberalism talk about neoliberalism, they're often talking more about foreign policy than they are tax cuts. Although certainly, as I mentioned, supply side economics and tax cuts for the rich are part of the early neoliberal ideas of the 70s and 80s. The Iraq War and Afghanistan War came from neoliberal ideology, bringing order as we see it to other regions. The idea of spreading democracy, like, for example, as the 2003 Iraq War claimed to want to do in Iraq, that is a neoliberal idea. What makes this a little difficult is that there's actually a split within neoliberalism about interventionism. Generally speaking, neoliberalism is for foreign intervention, but it doesn't always mean military intervention. So a lot of the people on the right who are against military interventions in many cases, under sort of libertarian ideas, it doesn't mean they aren't neoliberal. They often just favor intervention via soft power, diplomacy, quiet support for coups, and sort of other geopolitical tactics that are out there. So there's not one definition of neoliberalism. Anytime that we have an ideology that is often defined by its opponents, we have to be sort of cognizant of the fact that that is a thing in thinking about what is part of it and what isn't part of it. But that's sort of a basic structure for what neoliberalism means in practice right now in the 21st century.